Welcome to this explainer. All right, I want you to start by just taking a quick look at your watch, or maybe the clock on your screen. We literally live our entire lives by that ticking rhythm, right? Waking up, racing to work, scheduling every single moment. But I want to ask you something pretty fundamental. Is that ticking clock you live your life by actually a fundamental property of the universe? Or is it just a massive, shared human invention designed to keep our civilization running smoothly? Today, we're going to completely shatter your everyday intuition about time.
But to really figure out what time is, we kind of have to look inside our own heads first. From a neuroscience perspective, we've always just assumed that time is this external river flowing past us, right? Something we just passively track. While research reveals something far more bizarre. Your brain is not a passive clock at all. It is actively constructing your entire concept of time.
Okay, let's dive into this, because according to neuroscientist David Eagleman, our biological and psychological states govern our entire perception of now. Now isn't an instant that happens out there in the physical world and immediately registers in your mind. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a delayed, carefully stitched together psychological story that your brain serves up to your consciousness. Think about a really relatable example. Just snap your fingers. When you do that, it feels perfectly simultaneous, doesn't it? You see the snap and hear the sound at the exact same instant. But physically speaking, that's impossible. Your auditory system processes sound incredibly fast, while your visual system processes sight much slower. So to make sense of the world, your brain actually waits. It holds on to that fast audio signal, waits for the slow visual signal to catch up, stitches them together, and then serves you a neat little narrative that they happened at the exact same time.
So, because of this biological processing delay, we are literally all living millionths of a second in the past. You have never actually experienced the true, absolute present. Your brain needs time to edit the movie of your life before it lets you watch it. And what's wild is that during high-intensity events, like, say, a car crash, your brain's emergency control center kicks into overdrive and lays down incredibly dense memories. This completely warps the memory creation process, making the event feel like it's happening in slow motion, even though the physical clock hasn't changed a bit.
Section 2, Einstein's relational universe. So, if our brains are just making up their own timeline on a micro level, what is happening on the macro level? Let's zoom out to the cosmos. For centuries, we basically just bought into Isaac Newton's view of absolute time. Newton believed time was this rigid, universal metronome ticking away constantly in the background, whether you were paying attention to it or not. But theoretical physicist Lee Smolin gives us a much better analogy for Albert Einstein's view, which is relational time. Imagine a group of musicians. There is no background metronome. The musicians create the time and the rhythm dynamically between the notes they play. Einstein realized that time doesn't just exist empty on its own. It's created purely by the relationships and changes happening out there in the universe.
And this brilliantly illustrates that Einstein was absolutely right. Take a look at this experiment from 2010 in Boulder, Colorado. Scientists took two incredibly precise aluminum ion clocks, synchronized them perfectly, and then raised one clock just 12 inches higher than the other. The higher clock actually began beating faster. Why? Well, because it was just a tiny bit further away from the Earth's gravitational pull. Gravity literally warps and slows down time. Time isn't some universal tick, it is deeply personal and physically tied to gravity.
Moving on to Section 3, the block universe. This brings us to the absolute most shocking implication of Einstein's relativity. Take a second to really absorb this quote from Albert Einstein. The distinction between the past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. If space is everywhere, time is every when. This completely, totally shatters our everyday intuition of life flowing in a smooth, linear progression. Physicists actually call this the block universe. Imagine the entire history of the universe as a giant, solid cake. At one end is the Big Bang, and at the other is the end of the cosmos. Everything in between, your birth, the exact moment you're watching this explainer right now, and the end of the universe already exists simultaneously in this frozen block. We're simply moving our consciousness through it. We just experience this illusion where the past, present, and future seem separate when really they are simply different places in the block.
Now, how do we actually navigate that block? Well, philosopher Craig Callender explains that because light takes time to travel, observers at different locations slice this space-time cake at entirely different angles. When you look up at the night sky and see the star Alpha Centauri in your present, you're actually looking at light that is 4 years in the past. Your now includes a past event. If someone on Alpha Centauri looks at Earth right now, they see us 4 years ago.
There is no single universal now that we all share. Everyone just cuts their own unique slice.
Let's zoom out to our cosmological timeline and see how this builds on our understanding. When did this time block actually start? Physicist Larry Shulman theorizes something pretty incredible. For the first 380,000 years after the Big Bang, the universe was this dense, hot plasma soup where light particles couldn't move freely. And because time is a measure of change, and we measure change through light, time literally did not exist in the early universe. It wasn't until recombination, when atoms formed and light could suddenly travel freely, that the cosmic clock finally began to tick.
Section 4. Can we time travel? So, if the entire timeline already exists in this vast four-dimensional block universe, it brings us to a classic human desire. Can we actually make the sands of time flow backwards? You know, it's a deeply emotional question. Imagine being able to jump backward in the block universe just to see a lost loved one again, or maybe to fix a mistake you made when you were young. It's the ultimate dream. But what does the hard physics actually say about time travel? Well, the physics are split into two very different realities. Forward time travel isn't just possible, it's a proven fact. Russian cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev orbited the Earth at such high speeds that his personal clock slowed down relative to ours down here. He actually time traveled a 48th of a second into the future. But backward time travel? Yeah, that remains purely theoretical. As physicist Frank Tipler discovered, building a machine to go backwards requires impossible things, like spinning an infinitely long cylinder, which, good luck finding the materials for that, or manipulating massive amounts of hypothetical negative energy to hold open a wormhole without collapsing space and time into a black hole.
Since the technology for backward time travel requires godlike energy that we simply do not have, the most realistic path to revisiting history probably doesn't involve flying a ship through a wormhole at all. Instead, as computing power evolves exponentially, the extreme far future might simply compute the past. We could recreate history through perfectly accurate virtual simulations. Honestly, it might be the closest we ever get to physically stepping back into history.
Which brings us to Section 5, the limits of eternity. If we are locked in our slice of the present, surging forward toward the end of the universe, how do we reckon with the end of time? To answer that, we should look at the Amandawa tribe in the Amazon. Get this, in their language, there's no word for the abstract concept of time. They don't use clocks, they don't use calendars, they organize events purely by the natural rhythms of the seasons. They don't map their lives on some rigid geometric line from birth to apocalypse, constantly looking back at the past or fearing the future. You simply are in the present. It really highlights that our obsession with a timeline marching toward an end is just a Western cognitive technology.
So the crucial point here is, we are severely limited in what we can ever know about the ultimate fate of this timeline anyway. Just look at this incredibly, almost incomprehensibly massive number. 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. According to theoretical physicist Tom Banks, this is the amount of data bits you would need to collect to understand everything inside our universe's causal diamond, basically the entire history of everything we could ever possibly measure from the Big Bang to the end of time.
But now, compare that to this vastly smaller number, 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 90. Banks calculated that if a super-advanced civilization actually tried to build a machine big enough to measure just this tiny fraction of the universe's atoms, the sheer density of the equipment required would cause the entire experiment to collapse into a black hole, destroying all the information. The laws of physics literally prevent us from ever knowing the full story of the universe.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We are just a tiny, finite speck inside a massive block of space-time that we can't fully navigate and will honestly never completely understand. But rather than feeling terrified by that, shouldn't it be a little liberating? If the laws of physics prevent us from ever knowing the universe's ultimate fate, shouldn't we simply learn to embrace our own insignificance and live fiercely for the now? We may not be able to control time, but the true beauty is the mystery of experiencing it. So how will you spend your slice of the block today? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.